For listening. This is Carol. In this presentation, I would like to bring your attention to Jennifer T.H. Wattall's book, Concept-Based Mathematics, Teaching for Deeper Understanding in Secondary Classrooms. This was actually an inspiring read as I am taking up team leader in my school this year, and I'm trying hard to bring all brilliant math teachers on my team together to make our curriculum and teaching stronger. So, this book was written for group discussions, classroom implementation, and regular reflections. For various reasons, I couldn't host a book club on this book. Well, that was the original plan. However, I found this log very helpful either for personal reflections or for further professional development. As you can see that you can process the reading or discussions with very important points and quotes, or you can make connections between the book and your personal experiences, or you can brainstorm for ideas for your classroom implementation, or furthermore, you can question and critique. So I would really invite you to make the best use of the log when you process the reading. Now, let's have a look at my presentation outline. I would like to provide a summary of each chapter based on in-depth discussion questions. If you had a chance to read this book before processing this presentation, I invite you to pause this recording at times and reflect upon the questions from each chapter. Otherwise, feel free to return to these questions afterwards. At the end of this presentation, I will share some relevant resources. The link to the presentation slides will be attached to my published recording for everyone to access. Now, let's get started. The first chapter surrounds some fundamental questions, as you can read in the list of discussion questions here. As an example, why does math education need to undergo a reform? Why do educators need to include the conceptual understandings of a topic represented in a three-dimensional curriculum model? How do the structures of knowledge and process apply to the mathematics realm? What are the features of inductive teaching and the benefits of an inductive approach when learning mathematics? How does synergistic thinking develop intellect? And then finally, how would you use the different levels of inquiry in your classroom? They are exciting and difficult questions to approach for sure. But let's move on a bit. I need to say though, even though I grew up learning mathematics traditionally, I was lucky enough to have innovative teaching training and start my teaching in math in an IB school. So to some degree, I would argue that inquiry-based teaching has always been the core of my daily planning. But nevertheless, this book still enhanced my understanding and inspired me a lot. So, the first figure of the book demonstrates the hierarchy of what should be taught in mathematics. As you can see, facts and skills and processes, they are at the bottom of the hierarchy. They come after giving students the big picture, i.e., principle, generalization, concepts, topics. So here's a quote that I really like, and it appears very early in the book. I think it nicely summarizes mathematics teaching. So it says, mathematics is an inherently conceptual language of concepts, subconcepts, and their relationships. So I interpret the figure and the quote here as, well, math itself is learning by doing. It's essentially about hands-on and interactive events. Here is another important reminder that we should facilitate inquiries and guide students to connect mathematical concepts to real-life applications. Walton actually highlights throughout this book that Inductive teaching is the key to building up conceptual learning. So again, she said the concept-based model is generally a inductive teaching model that draws the understandings from the students as a result of structured or guided inquiry. And again, in this figure, you can see more specific mathematical examples. And again, I think the highlight here is we are facilitators rather than just lecturers. Here, I would encourage you to pause the recording and digest the figure for a moment. And then later on, use these definitions of principles and generalizations, concept, processes, and strategies to evaluate our daily teaching. Do you agree with the definitions or not? And how do you really utilize this hierarchy in successful implementation? I like this figure a lot because the juxtaposition of structure of knowledge and structure of process inspired me as I recalled some conversations with coworkers upon the importance of skills, practices, and strategies. My context in teaching IB math resonates quite well with the figure here, but oftentimes I need to go back and forth between skill building and conceptual understandings or conversations. So right now I'm curious to know, what is your experience? In fact, these two figures show that concepts, facts, and skills, they are not mutually exclusive in math education. Instead, they work well together to make powerful learning come alive. And then here's some of the quotes from the book. Bridge the gap between the facts and skills and conceptual understandings. And what a beautiful handshake here. Personally, I would definitely use these two figures for my next PD with my team members. I think they are really important reminders. And here are two more interesting ones on levels of inquiry hierarchy. Well, I need to say, the paraphrase for these two figures is that inquiry teaching or learning is a journey. Before we expect students to become open-minded inquirers, we need to provide step-by-step scaffolding, constant feedback, and endless encouragement. And again, pause the recording here and think how we support, or maybe we over-support our students. Do we really end at creating open-minded inquirers? Here we move into chapter 2, which touches upon more technical terms and examples in teaching math. Reading upon these questions, you can still see the structure of daily planning and how facts, skills, and concept can go together. Well, earlier this year, I did a preliminary study to compare major math curricula around the world. So when I was reading this graph here, I was delighted to see this comparison. Again, have a look, and I think no one can doubt that it is across the board that math education is about investigation, modeling, communication, reasoning, representation, etc., etc. Note that, though, memorizing formula or mathematical facts is never in this big picture. And here is another figure of the curricular comparison. Well, this is a different visualization of the hierarchy that we saw in the first chapter. While skills Algorithms, i.e., steps in problem solving, and strategies lie in the core of math education. Problem solving, making connections, reason and proof, inquiry, communication, and creating representations make conceptual and transferable learning alive. Again, pause for a moment. Think about our daily experiences. Do we really have all the elements in our planning and teaching? And I would say that yes, indeed, we start from the core, but eventually we want to aim at the higher order thinking. I love these two examples here, as they reminded me of a recent student who did exactly the same thing to overcome her math anxiety. As a visual learner, but with just little confidence in her computation skills, she struggled a lot with her own anxiety at the beginning of grade 6. But she was encouraged to draw and articulate her problem solving artistically. So the story ended positively and hopefully. She ended up finishing grade 6 with me, getting an award of the most improved student. Of course, she was excited and she couldn't wait to share the award and the achievement with her friends and family members. So, do we really keep in mind that every learner is unique and also discussion is essential in learning, especially in mathematical understanding? Well, here is another surprise. As a system thinker myself, I felt empowered and surprised right upon seeing these categories of macro, meso, and micro concept. Have a look. And I am sure you will agree with me that the categorization can similarly help our students to connect their math learning with other subjects. The question is, how do we connect and how do we make sure that they're not stuck in the micro concept, but they can move up to the hierarchy? Here are more examples. Again, pause the recording and digest them for a moment. Now, let's move on to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the foundation for how to plan and teach conceptually. The questions here remind us of figuring out the purpose of all our actions. As an example, why do we wish our students to understand principles and generalizations in mathematics? And of course, what opportunities do we provide to our students to demonstrate and communicate their conceptual understanding? And this slide is about scaffolding. While scaffolding is essential in modern education, we need to implement the 3 levels with these questions in mind. For example, how and why and so what? And we cannot disagree that teaching of facts serves to guide students to think through how, why, and eventually so what. And as you can see from here, this note says teaching target is level 2 generalizations. But I would argue against that by saying that we should end high and look at level 3. Essentially, we want to ask our student, why is it so important that we study the facts and ask all these conceptual questions? What do you think? The list here showcases useful strategies for student engagements. Of course, these are just some starts because if you look online, you will find all different strategies. But again, I would encourage you to try them out and see how they work for your students. Now let's move on to chapter 4. I personally enjoy reading chapter 4 because I like the process of producing unit plans in my growing IB experiences. These discussion questions and quite a few figures in this chapter are worth careful processing, discussions, and of course, questioning. But I think the fundamental question is, how does unit planning empower teachers? And also, I think the final one is important, especially in this post pandemic world. How will we encourage collaboration when unit planning? Keeping in mind that we are not alone. Well, the steps are important, but as you can see from here, it's kind of messy. So, my only critique is that I don't think it's really reader friendly. So, if I would need to create a PD based on that, I probably would create a more reader friendly infographic. Now we come into our daily lab in chapter 5, Strategies for Engaging Students. Walter again provides abundant research based engagement strategies, which are worth looking into and trying out. Among the discussion questions, however, I like the one on classroom design very much. So here's a quick summary of these strategies from this chapter. And the final one, classroom environment, flexible fronts, will be my next try to create a more student-centered classroom this year. Last year, due to all requirements and restrictions in response to distance learning, I, for some reason, successfully reduced my teacher talk time and increased student talk time. So this is time for trying something new. Moving into chapter 6, assessment. Well, the visual thinking routines from this chapter are important in terms of reminding us that assessment in mathematics shouldn't only be related to skills or strategies or paper based exams. Instead, more metacognitive ones should be included. Here, the Fourier model, as an example, is useful for documenting thoughts in group discussions and presentations. And I personally like the contrast between examples and non examples because usually we encourage students to think about examples, but we forget that, well, if you want to create convincing argument, you need counterexamples. So I would definitely try out this model more often in my classroom this year. And again, here are some discussion questions from this chapter. They're great reminders for us to brainstorm creative assessment, aren't they? Okay, right now we're moving into the final two chapters of the book. Chapter 7 is around the use of technology in a math classroom. And as we can see that there's a rise of using digital tools in classroom, especially during and after the pandemic. So thanks to the 6-month long distance teaching I had, I started to explore more useful tools and of course abandon a few. And I think the essential question here is, however, how these tools can really enhance learning. As an example, we encourage students to use Google tools, such as Google Docs and Google Slides. But how can we really ensure that students still engage in discussions rather than being distracted? Here is the final chapter, and it gives us some vision and encouragement. I think the questions upon the role of a teacher and preparing students for a unknown future inspired me the most. Well, I think it's true that as teachers, we don't understand everything, especially in this post pandemic moment. And as a lifelong learner myself, I am dedicated to more reading and sharing with fellow educators. Here I am in this presentation, and I am getting to the end. So this is the final slide for this presentation. Here are some inspiring resources that I collected throughout the reading, and I would like to share these resources with you later on. Thank you for joining me in this presentation and the reading. Let's make changes together.